In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make these little mini books that also double up as cute little Christmas tree decorations. So I basically came up with the idea for these while I was playing around with scraps of paper that I've got. So really little scraps like this that I'm always reluctant to throw away because I feel like they could be used for something. I got all my scraps out, got some Christmas cards out from last year, odds and ends of wrapping paper, so something that was a little bit festive, and just gave myself some time to have a play and see what emerged. So this was my first little book, and you can see it features these lovely little illustrations, so very much inspired by this card, which had lovely little pop-out bits, so I was able to incorporate them into the book. So you can see here the book's made up of lots of different layered pages, and I've incorporated some of that card into the book itself to create a kind of wintry, festive scene. And then I've used a Christmas card as the cover of the book. With my second book, I tried to make some of those little elements myself. So you can see here I've got some little houses here made from some scraps, and I've got some little trees made from the pages of old books, and I've even got the wrapper of one of my chocolate coins in there that creates a kind of almost like a moonscape in the background. So I'm going to do a bit of a hybrid of the two of these today to show you how you might create something a little bit similar. So I'll first go over what tools we need, and then what materials, and then we'll just jump in and start making them. So you're going to need a pair of scissors or a craft knife if you prefer to work with that. A ruler and a pencil will come in handy. A bone folder, an awl, a bookbinding needle. This is a size 18, so it's quite a delicate needle, which is quite good for the size of book we're working on because we're working quite small today. 2 bulldog clips. I've got a piece of cork tile that'll give me something to push into, and I've got my cutting mat to protect the table. I've got a piece of beeswax and some embroidery thread. You could also use waxed linen thread if you have that, or some waxed cotton thread if you have it. I've got some glue. So this is just kind of a glue stick, quite a strong glue stick. That'll work quite well. And then I always have my Yoo-Hoo glue to hand just in case I want to stick anything like card into the book. This will give me a better bond than the glue stick. So when it comes to materials, you just want a pile of different paper offcuts, decorative papers, old Christmas cards. So in this pile I've got this is some kind of marbling experiments, some kind of offcuts from prints that I've made, pile of Christmas cards that I can use, old envelopes. Inside of old envelopes come out really nicely, and you might end up with some really nice kind of festive stamps this time of year, so you could incorporate the stamps in. It's always quite nice as well to include handwriting or things that have been written on within your book, so I think I'm going to use a bit of this today. Old book pages, music sheets, offcuts of wrapping paper, so I've got all that there, and I've got some pages from magazines as well that have kind of snowy scenes on there, a bit festive to include in the book. You could also use your own photographs, bits of letters that you photocopied. Also, I tend to use the remnants of my chocolate coins. It makes me feel less bad about eating them because I'm eating them for artistic purposes. And then I've got this just bit of kind of decorative tinsel that I found in the Christmas box this year. So you might have other little bits like that that you could incorporate as well. So first up, we want to make the cover of our book. And in terms of sizes, I just cut these fairly randomly. They look quite similar in size, but I just kind of eyeballed which bit of the the kind of card that I wanted to include. So this is an old Christmas card. You could easily use something else that is of a similar thickness, so a bit of decorative card would work nicely as well. But I always find that this is quite a nice way to put these to use. And then you want to basically cut your cover. So if you want kind of some measurements as a bit of guidance for this size, this one here is, let's have a look, 6.5 centimetres by roughly 4.5 centimetres. So you want to cut out your kind of rectangle. So I'd probably measure 3.5 centimetres, give myself a little mark like this, line my ruler up, and then use the point of my bone folder to score a line. And then I'll keep my ruler clamped down, and if I wipe my bone folder up and down like that and then fold it together, that gives me a nice fold, and I can use that to cut the other edge. So that's given me quite a long book, and then I can decide how tall I want it. So let's have a look. Let's go for 5 centimetres. So again, you can play around with scale. It doesn't really matter how big you make it or how little, as long as you're kind of happy with the sizing. So I've done mine, so it's 5 centimetres high. I'm going to give it a chop, and that'll leave me with something like this. So just to give you the measurement, if I fold this out, that is 7 centimetres by 5 centimetres, and that's going to give me a book that's this kind of size, which is quite nice. So you can really use this to focus in on a certain element of the design on the card, or you can do it quite randomly and just see what you end up with, which is quite nice. So we want all our pages to fit within this cover. So I'm going to use this cover as a bit of a template to cut the pages that are going to sit within my book. So you can see from this example, it's quite nice to have a first page that is the kind of full size of your cover. So for this one, I've got some music sheet that's in there that then I stick to the cover to kind of give it a nice lining. So that could be music sheet, it could be wrapping paper, wallpaper, whatever kind of paper you'd like to include. You can be quite precise with this if you want, and you can measure with your ruler, draw in some lines and then cut it to fit. You can draw around your cover if you want to. What I do, because I'm quite lazy and I don't like measuring, is I just freehand it. So I hold my template in place, or you could put a clip in place, and then I literally just cut around my cover, and that's going to give me a piece of paper that's the right size. So I'll just cut that, and then I'm going to fold it so that it sits within my cover. So I'm just going to fold this with the bone folder. So I'm putting the ends to meet, so the corners to meet. Easier said than done. Holding it in place, and then I'm nipping the folded edge and sweeping out to each side. And then that's going to sit really nicely within my book, like so. So when it comes to your other pages, you want to start kind of making them incrementally smaller to create this kind of layered effect, and that's what creates this kind of landscape that starts to emerge within your book. So you can see here I've got a kind of a page that is ever so slightly shorter, working down to a really thin strip at the bottom. And then somewhere within that I've also started to cut into those pages, so I've got a kind of bit of an arch here. And the same with this other one. You can see I've got a page here that's kind of cut off. I've got my round coin in the middle. Then I've cut this page to a point. This page is a kind of soft arch, and then I've got a little slither at the bottom. So we'll start to build up the kind of decorative elements within that once we've got the main structure sorted. So have a rummage through your papers and start to look at what other decorative papers you want to include. What I generally do is if I've got papers that are big enough, I'll cut them the same size. So I'll do the same thing that I did with the music sheet. I'll use my cover as a template, and then once I've got a few cut, I can start to cut them down. Or if you have a nice little slither of something that you want to use, let me have a look what I've got in my pile. So say you've got a nice kind of, I don't know, slither of this that you want to use, you could just keep that to one side and we'll start to build it up. So I've got how many pages? Let's have a look. So I've got my music sheet that I've stuck to my inside cover, and then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 layers to this one. And this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers. So that 6 or 7 creates a nice effect, but you could use more or less, just see how you go. I'll keep the camera rolling while I have a play so that you can see how my book starts to come together. So that's a few different pages cut. So you can see here I've got them varying sizes, but I've used my cover as a template, and I've got this coin that I want to put in the mix as well too. So now it's just a case of figuring out how I want them to come together. So I know I want this to be my kind of inside cover page, so I'm going to have my cover and then my music sheet, and then I just usually kind of start to layer things up and think about how I want them to come together. So maybe, to me, this one looks a bit like sky, so I might have this one next, and then my tree is going to come down a little bit, and then this one, this bit of marbled paper, looks a bit like snow, so I'm going to keep working down. Or I've got this red one here. I might cut into this one so that I've got a bit of, oh, I need my moon as well, let me think. So hang on, I think my coin might come in here somewhere. I'll eventually fold all these. So this is just really about playing around with how you want them to come together. I might cut into this one so that I've got a bit of a, what might look like a bit of a hillside. Something like this. And then finally, I've got this little strip at the bottom. So you can see this is starting to come together. My book actually stops here, so I'm going to have to trim some of this off. So what I'm going to do now is kind of pinch things in place. So this is where you can use your clip if you want to. So just kind of line things up. I'm going to use a clip here to just clip these in place. Then I want this to come in. So if I flip this over, I can see that I've got a bit of an overhang over the edge of my book. So I'm going to flip this over and just trim it back. So using my cover as a bit of a template. So then I've got this. Then I want to add my little kind of hillscape here, like this. And again, there's quite an overhang. So I'm going to get my clip again. I've got another clip. I'm going to clip it at the edge so it's not going to go anywhere. And I'll flip it over and trim the excess off. You can do a final trim of all this once it's together to neaten it up. And then I've got my final little slice here. So you don't want to make it too small because we need to get a hole in there to stitch it together. But something like that should be okay. So I'm just going to trim that edge off. So I'm quite liking the look at that. I quite like to reveal a little bit more of the sky at the back. So what I might do is cut a little bit of this decorative piece away. So I'm going to chop into it like this. That's going to reveal a little bit more of the sky at this side. And if I pinch this together, I've still got the kind of moon illustration on the other side, which is quite nice. So I'm quite happy with that. I think what I'm going to do now is fold all these pieces of paper in half, so I've got a fold line down the middle, and then we'll stitch them in place, and then we can start looking at adding these other kind of decorative elements within there. So if you clear your space, pop those down, and then we're going to fold each individual piece, remembering what order we want them to be in. So I'll just fold these quite delicately with my bone folder. Once they're all folded, you can start to slot them into one another. So I've got my cover, I've got my inside decorative page, my next one, and give them a bit of a tap together so that all the folds kind of nestle quite nicely together. So they're nestling quite nicely together at the top and at the bottom. And then I can use my clips to hold everything in place. So I might pop one at the top here, and then I'm going to pop one further down to catch those smaller layers. Actually, I might pop it here because that's going to trap my little coin in there as well. So can you see how that's starting to come together? So that's all held together quite nicely. Now we need to put some holes through this. So we're going to do just a simple 3-hole pamphlet stitch to hold this together, with it only being quite small. But what I want to do, as you can see from here, is I want my top hole to come quite close to the top of my book, so that then I can create a nice fastening to hang it with. And I'll mimic that at the bottom as well, and that makes sure that this really thin kind of layer at the bottom gets trapped within the stitching, and then I've got a hole right through the middle. So again, I usually eyeball this. I quite like with this one, if I have my hole here, it's going to sit nicely within the layers that I've got. So I'm just going to eyeball my middle hole here, and then I'll do my top hole somewhere about there and my bottom one somewhere about here. But if you'd like to measure it, then feel free to measure it as well. What you can do, so you can use your awl, depending on what kind of thickness your awl is. If you've got quite a chunky awl, it might give you quite a big hole that'll kind of look quite torn and quite rough in your cover. So if you want to be a little bit more delicate, you can use your needle to do this bit, just as you've not got that many pages to get through. Just see how you go, but you'll want your piece of cork tile or a magazine or something to push into. And then what you want to do is get your little book at about 90 degrees. So I've got it kind of at 90 degrees like this. And then I'm going to go in at about a 45-degree angle like this. to make the holes, and that's going to make sure the holes go nicely down the spine edge. If you've got a book cradle, you could use a book cradle to do this, or if you've got a really nice chunky magazine that you can open on the middle page and you can wedge this in, that can work quite nicely as well. I'm just going to do it this way today. So I'm going to find where I want the middle hole to go, and I'm going to twist and push with my needle, and I'm going to put my needle all the way through so that I know that I'm going to be able to clearly get through that hole, and that should be enough. And then I'm going to go through and do the same at the top. Take my needle all the way through and at the bottom. Watch out for your fingers when you do this, it's so easy to catch yourself. So there you go, I'm just through at the bottom. It is a bit trickier with the needle because you've not really got much to hold on to. So you can see there I've got 3 holes. If you want a measurement as some kind of guidance, these holes at the bottom are about 4 mil in from the edge, maybe even 3 mil. You don't want them too close to the edge because they might tear to the edge of your book, but you don't want them so far in that they're not catching those really thin pages. So if you get your book looking something like that, we're then ready to stitch. So this is where you'll need your embroidery thread. So I'm going to use this red embroidery thread today. So if you find the end, I'm going to measure off enough. I basically want enough to stitch the book and then enough to create a kind of nice piece that I can hang it. It kind of depends what you've got in mind for your book. But to stitch it, I need a piece that's about 3 times the height of my book. So 1, 2, 3. And then I'd usually double it and then maybe add another length for luck. So basically, I've got a piece of thread that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times the height of my book. And that will be absolutely plenty. I'd rather give you too much than too little, but you'll be able to see what I have left once I've done the stitching. And then if you're working with embroidery thread like this, you'll want to wax it. So I've got a piece of beeswax. I'm just putting the thread on top of the beeswax and pulling the thread through until I've got a nice waxy layer, and that's just going to make it easier to stitch with, and it's going to create a kind of better finish, so it'll be less flyaway. So you can see already that's looking a lot more manageable. So with stitching, we're going to thread our needle up. So like I always say in my workshops, you want to kind of really nip the end of your thread and push the eye of your needle onto the thread. Like this. That should get it. Just missed it. So I'll give it a twist, nip it even more tightly, and then force it through the eye of the needle. Like that. And you just want to leave a little tail. And then we're going to do a nice simple pamphlet stitch. I'm going to start at the top hole. I'm going to take my thread through and I'm going to leave a nice long bit at the top that's going to become the hanging for my decoration. So I'm just doing this by eye. So I've left this bit here. If you want a measurement, because I know that I do things by eye, but sometimes it's nice to have a bit of a measurement. So that's about 12 centimetres I've left sticking out the top. So I've gone from the inside to the outside in the top hole. Then I'm going to come back in through that middle hole. So sometimes if everything's misaligned ever so slightly, I just go and poke a hole, poke it through the other side to kind of create a clear channel, and going back in through the middle. I'm dropping down to the bottom hole, coming all the way through. And then just to make this even, because we're going to end up going over the top edge of our book, I'm going to go around the bottom edge of my book and back through that bottom hole. So I just want this bit of thread to kind of nip round the bottom of my book. Can you see that there? So I've got that little thread there. Then I'm going to come back through my middle. Like this. Then I'm going back through my top hole from the inside to the outside. So your book should be looking something like this on the inside. So you've got a stitch all the way. And then on the other side, it's looking something like this. I'll just pull my threads tight. So you've got a stitch around the bottom and then all the way up. Then you can take your needle off and you can tie a knot. So what I usually do is tie these together. I can take my clips off. So to create a knot that nips together at the top of my book, I'm just going to do a knot with the two pieces of thread together. So I'm taking them through each other, and then I just want to shimmy that knot down so it sits neatly against the top of my book. So keep it quite loose, and then as you get towards the top edge of your book, you can pull it nice and tight. Like this. So can you see that there? That knot's just holding it in place. So you might need to pull your threads. I need to pull on one of them. This one, I think. That's it. So I've got my little knot there. And we can look at adding a kind of bead onto this later, but we'll do that as a kind of finishing touch. First of all, we'll look at adding some decorative elements into our book. So I've started cutting out some elements of this card to fit within my book. So I've got this nice little hut, got these people pulling a Christmas tree and some little Christmas trees here, but I'm also going to make some of my own. So if you can find some nice illustrations, you can also get some lovely illustrations on wrapping paper as well that you might want to cut out, or you could draw your own. I quite like making these really simple Christmas tree shapes, so it's just a triangle. So I've got one there, and then I've just cut a nice pointy triangle out of an old book page. I'll do another one here. So you can, again, you can freestyle these, or you could draw out a kind of shape to follow if you want. So I might do a Christmas tree with a bit of a stump here. And then part of the joy of it is seeing where you can fit them all in. So I'll just cut along my pencil lines. It's also about finding kind of papers that contrast quite nicely with the background that you're sticking them on, so they pop out quite nicely. So I've got my little tree with a stump there. And then I'm going to have a go at making a little house. So again, I can keep the shape quite simple. So I've got this bit of old envelope. So I'm just going to draw a kind of rough house shape with a bit of a chimney. So something like this. If you're looking for some inspiration, if you just look up online, you could look up, I don't know, a winter scene, or you could put winter village in illustrations, and it'll come up with some lovely examples that might give you some ideas. I'm thinking of a kind of little gingerbread house almost with this one. So just going to be a bit delicate cutting the chimney off. And then I'm going to cut that a little bit shorter. So I've got something like that. So you can rub your pencil lines out, and then you can add some detail to it if you want to. So this gets really teeny tiny. So I might want to put something on the roof. So what have I got that looks like tiles? I've got my inside of envelope here that could look quite nice. So I'm just going to use the corner to cut myself off the little roof. And this is all a bit of trial and error, so might need to cut it back a little bit. Put something like that. Quite nice. Might give it some windows, so I might try and find a nice bit of blue for the windows. So I've got my really little bit of scrap here, so I can use it to cut maybe 2 nice little windows. Again, I'm not that bothered about them being perfectly kind of straight. It gives it a bit of character. This is where you might want to use some tweezers because it does get quite small. So I've got 2 windows there. They're going to sit all right. I might need to trim them a little bit. And then I might think about a door. So I'll cut them windows down eventually, but then I'm going to put a little door as well. So colour for my door. What I got to hand. This is where it takes me ages because I could just faff around forever. Let me think. Maybe I'll just use some of my music score for a little door. So I'm just going to cut a little arch for the door. Something like that. And that can stick on. So I'm just going to cut those windows down, and then I'm going to use just my glue stick to stick those all down, and then we can decide where we want to put it within our little book. So that's my little house finished, and I made it a little pal to keep it company. So I've got all my little elements that I want to include in my book. So I've got these little houses, these trees, and these bits that I've cut out of my Christmas card. So now it's just a case of finding where I want to put them all. So this is where you can create more kind of layers and a bit of perspective, I suppose, within your book. So I first start by just slotting things in and seeing where looks nice. So just slotting these in here. Might pop this one behind. So it's quite nice having things that you have to kind of look behind. So I might pop this tree in front of there. I always think a couple of trees look nice together. So I might pop this one alongside it. And maybe a tree right on the front. And then I've got my trees here. Might be a bit too much. So it's just a bit of trial and error. I might include this one, but kind of have it hidden as a little hidden layer under there. So when you're kind of happy with where things are, you want to kind of take them off and remember, and then it's just a matter of sticking them in. So you want the pages to remain kind of movable. So if this one's going in here, I'd be putting a tiny bit of glue along the bottom edge and then gluing it to the underside of this page. So the good thing about using this Pritt stick is you can kind of maneuver it a little bit until you've found where you want it. Then when you're happy, you can push it down and that should stick it in place. Just make sure you're not sticking your pages together. So that's what it looks like on that side. And then I can do the same with this. So I'm going to just put some glue and then decide where I want to put it. So I think if I slot it behind somewhere like that, it's going to look quite nice. Just make sure my pages aren't stuck. And then it's just a matter of finding where I want to put my trees and the other elements. So I'll work away on this and I'll show you what the kind of finished result looks like. Actually, with this one, I've just put the glue on the front. I'm going to wipe that off because I want you to be able to see the front bit of it. So I'm just going to cut out this little nip and then I'm going to stick this one on the back. So if I want this here, I'm just going to stick it down like that. And then think about where I want these trees to appear. Might do one on each layer to really give it a sense of depth. Something like that. So I'll stick those in place. So that's what my finished book is looking like. I even managed to find a little star from my tinsel that I stuck on. So you can see how it's come together quite nicely. I'm just going to keep prizing those pages apart a bit to make sure that they don't stick together. But I've got quite nice layers and I've got a little hidden bit under here as well, which is quite nice. So then it's just about adding finishing touches. I'd probably kind of spread your pages out a bit and leave it to dry just to make sure that you're not sticking it together too much. But then you can look at adding anything further to the front and the back page that you might want. So I think for this one, I had some text from the envelope of one of my Christmas cards, so I stuck that. For this one, I think I just stuck one of the little illustrations from the card on the front here. I think I might leave this one blank because I quite like the kind of sparkly nature of it. What you might want to do, you can see here that some of my pages are hanging over the edge ever so slightly. So you could chop them back if you want to. So just watching that I'm not cutting any crucial elements of my book. I can just snip them back to kind of straighten it up. Again, it kind of depends how accurate you want everything to be. Quite happy with that. And then you can add a nice little bead on, which gives a nice kind of finishing touch. So this is just a bead from an old piece of jewellery. So I've just threaded it on, then done another kind of knot, and then created a bit of a loop for the tie. So you need something with the hole big enough that you can get the two bits of thread through. What sometimes is quite nice, and another nice way to use up really tiny scraps, is to make your own beads. So this is just made out of a strip of paper. So I'll show you how to do that. So what should I do? I might make this one out of my piece of envelope so it kind of fits in with some of the paper that I've used on the inside. So you want to cut quite a tall pointy rectangle. Not rectangle, sorry, a tall pointy triangle. So something like this. So however kind of big it is at the bottom here determines what size of bead it's going to be. So I might just trim mine down a little bit so it's not quite as big. So again, you can kind of measure this out, and I'm sure you can find dedicated YouTube tutorials on this online, but this is my kind of rough version. You can use PVA glue as well for this. I'm just going to use Pritt Stick because I find that that works okay. And you will need something to wrap it around. So the aul's quite good because it creates quite a decent sized hole so that you can thread it on. And then what you want to do, so eventually we're going to be wrapping this kind of around itself. So you want to put glue all down the kind of edge or decorative bit that you want to be on show. So just cover that in glue. And then I'm going to pop this on my awl, and I'm going to kind of roll this until it rolls onto itself. So you need to kind of just rock it back and forth, and then eventually it should roll onto itself like this, so that you can then start to wrap it around. So you're going to want to nip it tight as you go and keep wrapping around, and you're wanting the kind of middle, that point of your triangle to kind of hit the middle. So just keep wrapping round and round and round. You can get special quilling tools to do this. You could also use a kind of a skewer would work well as well. It's a bit sticky, but you can see that's created quite a nice little bead. So you might want to leave that to dry. So if you do that with a thin layer of kind of PVA style glue, once that dries, it'll dry really nice, and it'll kind of almost give a little varnish to your bead. But I'm just going to use this. I would let this dry, but I'm just going to show you now how this works. So I'm just trimming off my excess embroidery thread. I'm going to thread these both through here with my really sticky, gluey fingers. Pop that up there so that dangles onto my book, and then I'm going to tie another knot at the top of that to kind of secure it in place. And that should leave me with enough to hang my book. There we go. Just going to delicately pull that knot. So you can see that knot kind of locks the bead in place. And that's my book complete. So have a play around. I think these would look lovely as a kind of little garland of them, or if you just kind of made a little collection of them and kind of hid them around your tree, I think it'd be lovely. And you can see how each one can start to tell its own story as well. I really like the idea that we can kind of make up little stories to go with these little miniature worlds that we've created. So enjoy making those. I really look forward to seeing how they turn out and what imaginative scenes that you come up with. So have fun having a play, and do share the end result with me. I'd love to see them.